1. Now, I don't know a ton about the history of my childhood home, but I know that it was old as hell and one of the creepiest places I've ever lived in. It was a 4-story house, fancy right, with lots of dark spaces and long stairways. Basically, it was really big. There wasn't a moment in that house that I felt like I was truly alone, and there wasn't a hallway that felt truly empty. I was just barely out of toddlerhood when I started to develop severe anxiety. I was afraid to do anything alone. I was always checking behind me, sleeping with my head under the covers, seeing things, hearing things, you name it. I'm almost 100% sure there was something paranormal making me feel that way. I wasn't the only one seeing and hearing things, though. My older brother shared a room with me, so he always slept on the top bunk. His bed was maybe a foot away from the ceiling, and the attic was right above us. He told me that some nights he'd hear adult footsteps right above his head, just circling the attic. But it gets weirder. He told me that at one point he woke up next to a shadowy figure just lying in bed with him. He claims the figure had 2 white specks for eyes, and it wasn't acting malicious, just lying there silently. This might have been some kind of sleep paralysis hallucination, but considering the other events, I wouldn't be surprised if it was some kind of spirit. And now on to the worst one, playroom. The room was the creepiest fucking thing in the house, and I get shivers just thinking about it. I sat at the end of the long hallway on the top floor just below the attic. My room was down the hall from it, and it was always pitch black, just in case something moved. I often couldn't take my eyes away in fear of something appearing if I did. Somehow, every time I looked at that doorway, the door was wide open. And the door wasn't weak either. It worked perfectly fine and wouldn't open unless you turned the knob. I'd ask my dad to close it before I went to bed, and it would stay closed for a bit until it just slid open again. I'm not a door specialist, but it was just arguably creepy. But wait, there's more. Now that we're older and out of that house, me and my brother found out that we shared a terrifying experience. We both saw something incredibly creepy in the same place. I remember it vaguely. It was a small, neutral, glowing white face in the playroom. It looked a bit like a little kid from my memory. It had no body, just a pure white face in the dark. It was around my height, and its eyes were kind of just not there. I don't remember much, but I remember it was the single most terrifying thing I'd been through. I don't know if I hallucinated or what, but I know it felt incredibly real at the time. Maybe it was a dream or something, because all I remember is seeing that face, getting scared and running back to my bed. I don't think I screamed, but I seriously don't remember. I kind of love and hate thinking about it because it just makes my hair stand on edge. Thanks to that house, I have now been diagnosed with anxiety. I'm taking medication for it. I'm all right, but I thought it was worth noting. 2. I want to state I'm religious in some way, though I guess I fall under pagan. Most of my household is skeptic, and I am as well, at least with most things. So we're looking for logical explanations as well. Okay, last year I moved in with my aunt and uncle and their children. During this time, they just so happened to be moving to a bigger house. As common with our state, our house is very old. A few things were outdated and had to be changed before we moved. The house, however, used to be owned by a family. It's assumed the father left his junky wife and took his kids. I would agree with that if it weren't for the housing being horrible when we arrived to clean. Horrible. It was disgusting, and I can never forget scrubbing old dog shit out of wood floors. Not only that, but the house was still set up like they all lived in it. Even personal items were left. It's like they left in a hurry or something. But now that we live there, we've experienced more paranormal kind of things. Though a mimic stands out to me as well for some reason. It was small at first, though I was the first to experience it. My room used to be downstairs at the time, and I often had things in my wall. A giant dream catcher which I was gifted was one of those things. I shit you not, a loud-ass bang came from the wall. The dream catcher fell from the force. I was confused at first. I even went outside to figure what it could have been. I found nothing. Hung the dream catcher back up, only for it to happen again. I didn't put it back up, and when my family came home, I told them about it. The kids found it creepy, and my aunt was more keen on a logical explanation. My uncle is on board that our house is haunted. This was followed with hearing footsteps when no one is home or around. Our dogs freaking out over things that we don't see or hear, things disappearing and being found in odd places, etc. Even hearing family members calling for us when, well, they aren't. But this is what gets to me. Around this time, my aunt said she'd heard me come upstairs around 2 or 3 a.m. I apparently stood by the steps and said her name. When she responded, I didn't say anything. She'd gotten up and I was gone. She even went down to check on me. I was in bed, dead asleep. Even though I didn't get up that night. I had passed out around 11 p.m. before my aunt. A few more odd things have come to mind. One is about our house. I did mention it before, but our house has 3 exits to the outside of the house. All but one of these 3 is sealed shut, mostly with paint and some nails. But I think it was also plastered. Just weird to me. The next is weird, and it actually happened recently. I convinced myself I was crazy and brushed it off. Just realized its relation here. A few nights ago, around 10 or 11 p.m., I was trying to sleep. I was really tired and had a horrible ass headache. I sometimes do this thing where I pull my covers over my head partly, just enough to kinda enclose me. I mostly do it to distract me from letting my eyes wander. Plus, the weird protection feeling. It's not something I do unless paranoid. I was laying sorta half asleep, and I hear a male's voice close to clear as day, right in my ear. I literally froze and just lay there for a solid 20 minutes, listening to my heartbeat in my skull. I was fully ready to, see some intruder, but of course, there was nothing. He said something, but it sounded like a mumbled sentence. Hard to understand words. I did tell my aunt, but it was brushed off because I wasn't making much sense in my paranoid panic. I ended up going back to my room and cleansing it, called my partner, and then managed to fall asleep. It was just fucking odd. 3. June 30th, 2014, Calcutta, India. My dad had been in the ICU for nearly a month in a semi-conscious vegetative state, owing to tubercular meningitis. It was a private hospital, and so it became very difficult to continue with the treatment for financial reasons. And the doctors there told us there was no hope either. At that point, we decided to shift him to a renowned government hospital, and had to go through a lot of hassles to get him not only admitted to the hospital, but directly into the ICU. So in this very day, we were all set to move him from his private hospital to the government one. The hospital discharge formalities took several hours, and by the time my dad was put into an ambulance for the shift, it was evening, and it started to pour very heavily. My sister and cousin accompanied my dad in the ambulance, and me with my uncle followed them in the car. After traveling for about 45 minutes, there came a junction which usually had heavy traffic jam, and we decided to let the ambulance go in that direction, as cops would let the ambulance pass anyway, and once they get past that signal, it would be a relatively quick drive to the hospital. Me and my uncle took a U-turn to take a different and slightly longer route, which would have lesser traffic so that we could reach the hospital before or at the same time as the ambulance. After taking the U-turn, we continued down the road, and there I saw her. An old lady standing almost in the middle of the road, skin as white as paper. She was wearing a white sari and was holding a thick walking stick. It looked more like the branch of a tree. Staring in that direction where the ambulance went, she didn't have an umbrella with her, and all the shops were closed because of the rising level of water in the street. The water had risen to the point where our driver couldn't take his foot off the accelerator, lest the water might seep in through the exhaust. Me and my uncle both saw her, but didn't talk about our experience until a couple of days later. My dad passed away on 13th of July. To this day, it still baffles me what that lady was doing amidst torrential rain in the middle of the road holding something like a tree branch. And I've never ever seen someone having such a pale and white skin. 4. I'm a 25-year-old female and have always been more in tune with the supernatural, and my first memorable experience I just so happened to witness with my cousin. When we were much younger, my cousin Kay and I went to a birthday party for one of our older cousins, Kat. It was a gorgeous day in June, and it was a perfect day to enjoy a nice summer breeze at the Duncan Park in Natchez. While this park had its usual picnic tables and playground equipment, it was surrounded by weeping willows, which aren't that uncommon to find in this part of Mississippi. However, unlike other parks, this one was sitting right next to an old plantation house, an abandoned YMCA that closed down in the 70s, and the front of an old locomotive that the city was forced to fence off because my aunt had defaced it in her youth. My cousin Kay and I ran around the park while waiting for the rest of our family to show up to enjoy the festivities. That's when we saw them, 2 women dressed up in pastel lacy dresses with bell skirts and bonnets, the style resembling that of the Civil War era. However, in our 7- and 8-year-old brains, they were dressed like Barbie princesses, so we followed as we still had that child naivete when it came to stranger danger. They walked up the steps to the front porch of the Greek Revival-style home, where we saw a few men in tailcoats adorned with top hats and what looked to be afternoon teas set upon the table. My cousin and I had watched at a distance, at first completely entranced by the scene in front of us. It was like something out of a fairy tale. We got a bit closer. I remember we were going to ask them something. What were we going to ask, though? I do not remember. I do remember that as soon as the word, "Hey," came out of our mouths, the ladies in dresses and the gentlemen in suits stopped what they were doing and floated through the walls of the house, disappearing completely. My cousin and I stood there and looked at each other for a few minutes in disbelief at what we had just witnessed. Kay and I came to a silent understanding that no one would believe us since we were just children, and would be written off as having overactive imaginations. We went back to Kat's party like everything was normal, and didn't utter a word of what just happened to anyone. Fast forward to when we were teens, we finally told my mom what we'd experienced all those years ago. Mom told us that the Auburn plantation had reenactments in the spring, so what we must have seen was former residents enjoying the summer breeze, like they were still amongst the living. Although, to clarify, having actors reenact during spring used to be quite common for the Auburn house, but they generally couldn't phase through solid objects. No one's that talented. Maybe Tom Hanks. 5. A little backstory. Since I was about 3 and throughout my childhood, I would have sporadic, inexplicable experiences that I still don't understand. Once I moved out on my own, almost everywhere I lived in my 20s had some sort of weird activity. For instance, hearing footsteps and silverware clanking around in the kitchen when I was the only one home kind of thing, being scared out of my wits and running to shut the bedroom door and hide under the covers. When I was in my late 20s, I moved into a studio apartment. Shortly after, my boyfriend and I were taking a nap in the new place, and he said lightly, "There's someone breathing in here," and then basically drifted off to sleep. How he did, I don't know. I was awake after that statement, and immediately focused on whatever breathing he was talking about. It sounded like someone standing in the middle of the room, about 3 feet from the bed, and breathing through their nose. Not from a wall or a device, but just in the middle of a bunch of empty space. I listened acutely, and the more I listened, the louder it got. Like take a long inhale and exhale through your nose as loudly as you can. And that's what it sounded like. Then it started changing its breathing pattern to 1 long inhale, 2 sharp exhales. I felt like it knew that I was listening, and was doing this all to be like, yeah, I'm here. It also changed locations, like it was sort of floating across the room. It started around the foot of the bed and made its way closer to the head of the bed. I was annoyed. Like I thought for once I could just live in a nice, normal place. It felt like having pests almost everywhere you move. It wasn't that scary with my boyfriend dozing there beside me, but I was living there alone and seriously didn't want to have one-on-one time with whatever this was. That was the part I was dreading. The day after I came home from work, turned the key in the lock and thought, please don't be breathing. Please don't be breathing. As soon as I opened the door, I heard one long inhale and one long exhale from the center of the room. My stomach dropped. Around this time, a friend from my hometown, Shane, died in a car crash. A group of friends and I piled in my car and drove a couple of days to attend his funeral. He posthumously released a CD of his music, which we popped into the car's player for the drive home. Perhaps coincidentally or not, once that CD was in there, the eject button quit working. My friends and I joked that Shane insisted on us listening to him. I didn't mind. I can't remember if Shane's funeral was before or after the discovery of the breathing sounds, as it all happened right around the same time. I do remember Shane's CD stayed firmly stuck in my car's player for days after I got home from his funeral. The eject button rendered useless. So that was the only CD I could listen to in my car. And I do remember around this time, while alone in my place, I heard it. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. And fear hitting me. At that moment, I just knew I wanted to listen to Shane's CD inside that apartment. Like his music would drown out the sounds of the breathing. I flew down the 3 flights of stairs to the parking lot and got in my car, turned it on and pleaded, please, I really need you right now. Hit eject, and the CD popped right out, no problem. Now, if that was merely a coincidence, and I honestly don't feel it was, but if it was, and what a coincidence. My gratitude and relief in that moment were great. Carrying that CD, I felt like I was armed with protection. Once back in my place, I put the CD on, and it was like immediate comfort, hearing Shane play and sing. It felt like my friend was there and I wasn't alone. As I sat and listened to his music, it was like a mental switch flipped, and I resolved not to give any more fear or attention to the breathing thing. And I really felt like it was going to be okay. I simply wasn't afraid anymore. I don't honestly remember if I heard the breathing after that night, because I was no longer interested in it or afraid of it. Basically, once I quit focusing on it and fearing it, it disappeared and didn't return. And weirdly, I haven't experienced anything darkly paranormal in about a decade. I'm still wary of it, and I'm not ruling it out, but yeah, I don't miss it. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Paranormal Stories, episode 321. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Please do pop a like before you go, thank you kindly. It's a big help to the channel. And a little boop from you. Boop, boop, it goes boop, boop, boop. Anyway, right, so let's move right along to Hellfreezer's question of the day. And today's question is, thanks to my moderator Shigar, and it goes like this. After helping someone with a problem, they offer you a deal. You will now be magically given 3 meals a day that will just appear when your normal mealtime is. But you get 2 choices to pick from. Conditions come after you pick. Both choices will be a full-course meal, with all your nutrition you will need, even if it doesn't naturally have it. 1, you get to have a themed meal, which, is, let's say you pick salad, and you can have any kind of salad for a meal till you die. Example, one day you can eat nothing but Caesar salad, but day 2 you can have pasta salad. As long as it's a type of salad, you're fine. And 2, you get the same breakfast, lunch, dinner, dessert meal for the rest of your life, i.e. biscuits and gravy, turkey salad, lobster, ice cream. The condition: 1, the themed meal will be of average quality from your local sit-down restaurant. 2, your meal will be the best quality known to man, and you can pick an expensive type of meal for each meal if you wish to compensate for having to eat the same thing every day. You are offered to change to the other option, but quality will drop by a degree in magnitude every time you do it. Which one do you pick? What meals are you eating for the rest of your life? And do you switch to the other option or stick with what you first picked? So if I'm understanding that correctly, one meal has a little bit of flexibility, and the other one would be the exact same thing. And if you get bored on a certain day, you can switch to the other, but it won't be quite as good. So, well, obviously the themed meal is going to be pizza because pizza is extremely versatile. You can even get dessert pizzas. So there we go, that's very easy. And assuming there's no negative side effects, I'm picking king prawn curry. As I should know what, I can't eat curry anymore. So I'm going to pick cheeseburgers with lettuce, bacon on there as well, maybe a couple of pickles, and fries on the side. There we go. Please do let me know what you think, and pop your answer in a comment below. And with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.